We've covered Amstrad's attempt to enter the console world with the GX4000, a consolised version of their Plus range of home machines. They also own Sinclair, so really that's 2 of the top 3 manufacturers taken out. But that leaves Commodore. What was their strategy? And here it is, the Commodore 64 game system, or as we'll know as the C64 GS, or just the GS. It was launched in December 1990 and discontinued, well, not very, very long after that. It shipped an estimated 2,000 units. It's considered to be the lowest selling console of all, at least on Wikipedia. I'm not convinced by that. There were quite a few other machines that had much smaller markets. I suspect there's a few that could rival that number, but yeah, as it's certainly very, very small numbers were sold. The specs are, well, I mean, it's a Commodore 64 inside, which you'll see later exactly how true that is. It's got a MOS technology 6502, specifically the 8500 variant, just a modified version, but like the 6510, which has just got a few extra pins attached. It runs at 0.9 megahertz in power regions and 1 megahertz in NTSC regions. It's got 64K of main memory, of course, given the name. And it's also got an extra half a K of colour memory to help with the display. Right, well, I guess we'll take a look at the outside first. So, yeah, I mean, it's okay looking. It looks kind of like a Citizen printer, really, one of the travel ones. But it's not too bad. It's got this nice little coloured black bit with kind of the very gamey targeted system here. There's a light in there as well. There's nothing on the front. It's nice and clear on the front. On the side, it's very much like the Commodore, again, because it's, as we'll see inside soon. So the joystick ports are there, as is the power lead and the power switch. And on the back, we have RF with a signal switcher and also an RGB stroke monitor output. And that's it. This is literally machine. This one, in fact, look. When we open this one, it's going to be the first time it's been opened. Look at that. So yeah, it's a very, it's a robust machine. It's like the Commodore 64 before it. It's pretty reliable. It came with its own variant. Let's just let the camera catch up. There we go. It came with its own variant of a joystick, and it's this one, the Cheetah Annihilator. This one's special because it's got 2 buttons, so this one is secondary to the others. Unusual for the 8-bit machines or 8-bit computers of its time, and it's trying to get around the fact that this didn't have a keyboard. Yes, on the subject of that, so the games. Around 30 games were released. Mostly, though, they were just ports from the existing C64 library. There were very few actual cartridge-only games. The issue with that is that a lot of C64 games, because there were quite a few C64 games released on cartridge, because the C64 could use cartridges. Literally all they've done is they put the cartridge port up the top here. But it meant that a few games were just kind of just ported across without any thought about how they would work that way. So there's one specific game which we will look into, which is the Terminator 2 version. Actually, we can show you that because it's right here. So there you go. So this is a Terminator 2 cartridge. Now, it's Terminator 2, but it also got the image system and the modern music maker. You can see right there, it definitely says it's compatible with the GS, which is this machine. Now, the problem with that is because it's got 3 separate programs on it, it requires you to use the keyboard to select a thing to play. And there's no keyboard, and no amount of joystick input will make that selection for you. So, yep, a game that was released and sold as being a GS game is not actually usable on the GS. There were other versions released which didn't have that issue, but yeah, not a great start. And there was a lot in the library C64 library which did require some keyboard input, and that made it rather difficult to port them. Why did this fail? I mean, there were quite a few reasons. A lot of the reasons are shared with the GX4000, but again, even more so. So the GX4000, yeah, it was based on Amstrad's 8-bit computers, but it was based on an enhanced version of those computers. As we saw, the graphics and sound and other capabilities of that machine made it able to compete with the 8-bit consoles of the time, not the 16-bit ones. But this wasn't an updated version of those machines. This was the Commodore 64, which at this point had been selling for 8 years. And so it was quite a way behind the rest of the market. And yeah, the games do not look as good as was capable on those 8-bit machines. The SID chip is as good as ever, of course. There's no problem there. But the actual what this machine could do, it wasn't capable of competing. Which, you know, a great computer, yes, but it didn't have the power to compete. It was also a very rushed product, as we can see from the whole Terminator release. This whole thing was announced and released in quite a short space of time. The other thing is that Commodore announced that it would be, when it released, it would have hundreds of games available. This was, of course, based on the idea that it was just going to run Commodore 64 games. Therefore, the Commodore 64 had thousands of games, so this would at least be able to have hundreds of games. But again, because a lot of those games weren't that easy to port, they had multi-load tape systems, they had special tape systems which would have to be converted to cartridge systems, and they had keyboard use, all of which had to be converted. A lot of games did use joystick as its default method, but they may still have had other control things like menus, which allowed you to set options and stuff. So it wasn't quite as cut and dry as a few of the higher ups at Commodore, I suspect, imagined it would be. And so because of that, we got cartridges like Terminator 2. Maybe not, people got their money back, people got to choose other versions of games, but it's one of those things that just kind of drops the people's faith in a product when you get mistakes like that. In the end, Commodore just realized that this wasn't a product that was going to sell. They reclaimed all the stock, they converted them back to Commodore 64s, and this Terminator 2 cartridge became a pack-in title for one of the box sets. So, kind of, I guess, sort of worked out for Commodore in the end. Now, this wasn't even Commodore's first attempt at a console. That tribute, I guess, is owed to the 3000H TV game, which was basically a Pong clone, and they made quite quickly after getting hold of MOS technologies. And of course, it wouldn't be their last console either. One of the 16-bit machines that this was going to compete with was Commodore's own Amiga. Now, at the time, they couldn't just make an Amiga clone because getting it to run from cartridges, CDs weren't really an option then, and getting it into a form where it would be cheap enough to be a home console like this without having to use keyboard and everything like that was just deemed as too expensive and too difficult, and so they went with the entry-level machine, the Commodore 64. Obviously, eventually they would release multiple consoles based on the Amiga, including the CD-TV and the CD32, but those are, well, CD32 we've covered. CD-TV will certainly be popping up at some point. But yeah, it's an interesting decision. I can see why they did it. The consoles of the time were making quite a lot of money, and they were starting to really, really bite into the home computer market at this point. A computer market which had probably felt itself was quite safe because it largely weathered the games crash which America had been hit by. So I'm guessing they were feeling quite safe where they were, and then suddenly NES and Master System started to take not huge chunks, but certainly noticeable chunks out of the market. And so both Amstrad and Commodore both decided to jump at that. It's kind of interesting would Sinclair, had he still had control of Sinclair Research, done the same? I suspect not, because he didn't really believe in games. So even in that situation, I suspect he probably wouldn't have bothered trying to make a game system. Certainly there were rumours of game system-like machines, and there is a Eastern European clone called the Alf, which I would love to get my hands on, which is basically a consoleized Sinclair Spectrum. And obviously there's been more modern clones that made it into a console-like machine. But anyway, I digress. How about we take a little look inside of this before we go off and try to play some games? Right, well, here we are. The removal of 4 case screws and the breaking of a a warranty seal and one internal screw. We have the motherboard, and as you can see here, these are the bits that are hidden away behind the plastic shielding, and these are indeed the expansion user ports that a normal Commodore would have. And right here is another port which would have been for the tape drive and such like. This here is the cartridge port, which is rotated 90 degrees. Normally would have been poking out that way, and a nice big ass fuse there. Some lovely radial capacitors and normal capacitors, all of which look okay. Yeah, they look okay. Don't forget to do anything with those yet. I can't smell anything either. No fishy smell to show that there's a problem. Right here we have our 8500, which is our lovely 6502 version. Then this here is the special GS ROM, which is what makes it what it is, rather than an actual full-blown Commodore 64, or I guess vice versa. Make a Commodore 64 into a GS, if you'd want to do that for some reason. Yeah, so it is a Commodore 64 by any name, just with bits covered up and bits moved around and one thing removed. It's fascinating. It was an interesting way of doing it, certainly. Kind of going to the point where you try to keep it as low a price as possible by just reusing as much as possible. Yeah, fascinating machine indeed. Right, well, I guess we'll try playing some games. There's only going to be a couple of games. I don't have many for this because I mostly play on the Commodore 64, because why wouldn't I? But we'll play what we got. See you in a bit. And here we are. It's not really a game in a sense. Yeah, we're just going to try out this Terminator 2 cartridge, and there you can see this is the menu that pops up right at the beginning, and yeah, no manner of controller movement will let you do anything there. That's unusable. Right, well, let's move on to one of the other games. And here we are with Shadow of the Beast, a fairly well-known game. Probably more so from the Amiga, but yeah, it's not a game I'm particularly fond of, I will admit. But you know, it's a fairly good example of graphics on the Commodore 64 machine. They're pretty good graphics all in all. These are probably the ones that come closest to at least resembling what's on the 8-bit consoles. And you know, the SID chip doing its stuff is always good. Come on, get off. I don't know how I got off the ladder. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this game. I find it quite dull, and I know it's loved by a lot of people, but yeah. But it's a pretty nice looking game. It's a nice simple para that's going on, and some nice big creatures and animation. Oh, no. Punch to kill him. Giant thing. Never mind. This is an older game for the Commodore, Wizard of War, just to kind of prove that old games do, some of them did actually work. I'm a big fan of Wizard of War. It's a very simple game. It's better in 2-player obviously, but still a good game, very Berserk-like. And Berserk was quite frankly just a really, really good game. But yeah, not an experience that's going to particularly challenge the NES or the Master System. But a fun game anyway, so sometimes that's all that matters. And it moves at a fair wick, and it's very, very colourful. Well, you know, to a point. Yeah, it's a good game. Right, well that's the Commodore 64 game system. Almost certainly I'd put it down as Commodore's worst attempt at entering the games market. Not a hard one to say, really. The CDTV is also not well liked, but well, that's a case for another video. But I would still put it against ahead of this by quite a way. Kind of not their fault. They didn't really. Nobody really understood what the 16-bit consoles were going to do at this point. Amstrad didn't, and yeah, Commodore didn't. and certainly other 8-bit micro companies didn't realise. So you can kind of understand why those mistakes were made. But yes, a shame they couldn't get it together to get an Amiga console out there early, a proper console. It would probably have done quite well because it would have competed with those early 16-bit machines. Anyway, these things go for a huge premium now because there's just not many there, because Commodore took them back and made them into Commodore 64s. There's not a huge amount out there, so they do go for a massive premium. The Annihilator joystick is especially rare as well. And obviously other joysticks with 2 buttons like Master System aren't compatible, so you either have to make an adapter or you have to actually just find another joystick or forget about the second button. It's not worth it, I'll be honest. If you really want this experience, if you're not like me, just an idiot collector who wants to just wants to own all these stupid machines, then I wouldn't bother. Just get a Commodore 64. You'll be able to play all the same games and more, and have a lot more of an interesting machine as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit like. If you really enjoyed the video, please hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy the video or you have something else to say, then please leave it in the comments below. See you next time.